We're going to begin with our lunchtime keynote, and our presenter is Dr. Dolana Mogadime. And she's from Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario. You have a fan club.
Thank you.
She'll be talking about the importance of oral histories, human rights, and intersectionality, Black women in STEM. And I'll read Dr. Mogadime's biography. Writing about oral histories and life stories at the intersection of human rights and intersectionality, Black women in STEM, Dolana Mogadime's longstanding work in oral history and life story research contributes to an understanding about how human rights and intersectionality impact the lived experiences of Black women. Working as the inaugural visiting scholar with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, Dolana developed an approach that she uses to examine the lives of Black women. Teachers, educators, and education students will acquire insights into how they may further develop their own inquiries using the methods for their inquiries into the contributions of Black women and women in STEM that Dr. Mogadime discusses in her workshop keynote. Our distinguished speaker is a professor in the Faculty of Education and past PhD program director for the Joint PhD in Educational Studies at Brock University. Her research interests are in human rights and curriculum studies, critical sociology of education, equity studies, and feminist theories. She has published in international and national academic journals and anthologies on such topics as women in leadership, gender-based violence, human rights education, teachers' life stories and commitments to equity in curriculum and human rights. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podium Dr. Dolana Mogadime.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afua Cooper. I am so thrilled and delightful and really thankful to be here with you today. Thank you so much for your presence. And so I want to begin the PowerPoint with just that introduction on the importance of oral histories, human rights, and intersectionality, Black women in STEM. I'm going to just flow through some of these key areas on oral histories, stargazing, the history of women in sciences, personal and professional growth in terms of teaching, and then a summary at the very end. So I'm here because I believe, after a lifetime of work in this area, thank you so much, Afua. After a lifetime of work in this area, I believe that oral histories are pivotal for reclaiming lost or forgotten history. In the last few years, I've worked very closely with the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, and I've developed a set of support materials that can assist teachers in gaining an appreciation of how life stories can illuminate the historical, social, and a political life. And I've done so with curriculum across from interdisciplinary contexts, not just in civics, but in women's and gender studies, looking at how careers actually can be developed in and through the uses of oral histories, and asking our students to participate themselves in this endeavor of oral histories in their own families. So the oral histories that this image speaks to are based on my own family and our matriarch. This is Caroline Goody Shabalala Mogadime, and she has fought a lifetime for the rights of children. to be educated. This is a passion that she has carried. It runs through her blood. It is based on her own life, having been born in South Africa during the apartheid era, where Black people were denied of their fundamental rights to education. So this has been something that she has fought for in her throughout her lifetime. She was born in one of the townships in South Africa where there was very little running water, and children suffered a great deal around, unfortunately, malnutrition. So the oral stories that we talk through, my mother and I, and also the Museum for Human Rights, give a testimony to the will of the people. And so the lessons that I've developed that document my mother's life and contribution talk about how activism can lead to change. And they demonstrate how human rights are intersectional, that they cut across race, class, and gender differences. And so what's so amazing about this endeavor with my mother is her conveying of this transfer of a passion for education, again, from this intergenerational knowledge. And specifically because that intergenerational knowledge has the potential to sustain life for many generations to come. So beginning with our mutual ventures in co-parenting. These are my two sons, and they had two moms growing up, my mother and myself. And they benefited tremendously from being reared in a home that nurtured their passion for education and their vision of their future successes. They both studied math in high school and excelled, and their success was something that they knew that was real to them, as real as taking their next breath. And people always ask me today, how did I raise such remarkably successful sons? And so my answer really is that they actually had no choice. They were being raised by two teachers. They had to succeed, right? But the reason I mention that is because I hope you, as educators, will instill this kind of vision for success in the minds of your students. So I've come here today to tell you about this fundamentally important vision for our children and our youth's success. And then your role is really to be a human rights defender and to defend their potential and their rights to achieve to their highest possibilities. And unfortunately, there is a myriad of research that tells us otherwise. As the Right Honorable 27th Governor General Michel Jean mentioned today, that our children are growing up in environments that discourage them. And Afua Cooper spoke about her important conversations that she had with her daughter, in which she had to correct the history that she was being taught in school. So it's this kind of relationship that we potentially have as mothers to tell these counter stories that can actually support the growth of our children as, you know, and their futures. Of course, yes, please. No, go right ahead. Okay, no, you're very welcome. No, that's fine. So, you know, mothering actually is a form of activism, and as I was listening to both the Right Honorable and Afua, it reminded me of the important role that we all have in terms of our activism for building both success and strength as an asset in our children's lives and correcting the kind of education that they receive at schooling. So how many of you have been oh, I need to go backwards. Sorry about that. I need to go to this other slide here, because these two individuals tell us that it's important for us to understand who we are as loving people. And this is Bell Hooks and Parker Palmer, and they talk about the importance of self-actualization. That actually is a first step to being whole for ourselves and whole for our students. And we actually can't give anything to our students until we embrace our self-understanding about who we are. And so what is that self? And you may ask that question. I would simply answer, well, it's the spirit. It's this case of spirit, especially for the rights of our children to grow and to be nurtured to the fullest extent for their possible bright future. So this notion about love of oneself as a teacher has to begin and then within ourselves, and then we transfer that to our students. So how many of you have been completely enwrapped and enthralled in the images that have been coming out over the last few weeks from NASA? How many of you have been watching this amazing celestial vision that's unfolded? Yes, it's incredible. These images capture galaxies some 6,000 or 7,600 light years away. They're just phenomenal, and they're taken from the James Webb Telescope. They've captured some regions 30 billion years into the past. This one is actually the region where stars are born, are created. It's just a magical image. And honestly, I've been up late at night gazing into these pictures. And President Biden said of the first few images that he saw, how amazing it is to learn about the possibilities. I just want you to keep that in mind as we talk about some of the amazing poets like Tracy K. Smith. She's an African-American acclaimed U.S. poet. She composed a most beautiful poem titled My God. It's full of stars. It's about her father's work as an engineer. She writes of the images from the Hubble Space Telescope. And in her poem, she says, quote, "We saw to the edge of all there is," unquote, meaning during the navigation into outer space. She was so enthralled by it that she composed this award-winning poem. So, with that in mind, I have another question for you. Do you see Black students for their amazing possibilities? I want you to keep that in mind, because when I look at the writings of our youth, like Abiba, I'm really struck with their incredible creative talents and potentials. As I read through the introduction of Habiba's book, and if you don't have it, it's at that table, and I suggest that you buy it. It's called Black in Schools. And my colleague said of Habiba in the introduction that she's a strong poet. And so other questions I would ask to teachers in this room is, how many of our children are you supporting to become who they truly are, like Habiba? Are you giving them the tools to become the poets, to write their own stories? Because that is their human right. And so I challenge you today, and I'm speaking to you all as educators, more than per se academics. That's the nature of my talk today. It's for educators, teachers. And I challenge you to do your own inquiries about your professional learning and growth. I've developed this cycle that can be used to document your professional reflections on your growth. And, but first I want to begin with using the same cycle in how I presented or prepared for today. And I'm really happy that Leslie Clote is with me, and she's going to be using this cycle as well in her presentation today. Leslie's a high school STEM teacher. So this approach has the kinds of legs that can be used for our own creative thinking as people that are in the process of transformation, learning about Black history, Black people in STEM, and wanting to document our own transformation as educators. So for me, I started with a question, as this cycle suggests. The question was, thinking from a historical perspective, what influences have women had on STEM? Who are they? And what impact have they had in their respective fields? So to answer that question, I had to investigate, find different resources and information on the topic. I sought academic articles, yes, but also articles written by teachers and educators, articles that have been written and work that has been published by professional associations. So really, it was really about developing this sense of desire to know, an area that may be new to you, or one that you think is important for you to know more about, and having this kind of humility in your desire to learn further. So what I found was just incredible. I found this wonderful person whose story dates back to about 4,000 years ago. Enhenwana was born in the modern-day South Iraq, and it's probably why we don't hear about her history. I think that Enhenwana should become a household name, like any other influential scientist. So she is the very first person who, in recorded history, authored her own writing. So she did autobiographical narrative of her inventions. She was an archaeologist, she was a mathematician, she studied astronomy, and thanks to the work of feminist researchers who have insisted that women be inserted into the annals of history, there are now years of dedicated research in praise of the creative genius of women like Enhenwana. And something that I think of that's very important and remarkable is her distinction, and again, as the very first recorded woman scientist. Dr. Stephanie Howard, a physicist from the US Naval Observatory, now retired, dedicated years of research in Enhenwana. In her most recent powerful article entitled "The First Recorded Scientist," Howard describes Enhenwana as follows, quote, "Calendar keeping was the work of ancient astronomers. The first woman was Enhenwana, the chief astronomer priestess of the ancient city of Ur in Sumer. She lived in 2300 BCE and was the first scientist in ancient history whose name we know and writings we have," unquote. Sarah Glaze also helps us to understand how Enhenwana's poetry represents the origins of mathematics and its historical, social, and cultural context. So we must take the time to recognize the giants that came before us, and recognize as well that their history has been not just marginalized, but overshadowed. It's time that we look at the fact that racism shapes what we know and what we don't know, and that Enhenwana's name should become a household name, like any other important scientist. The interesting thing about her story is that I myself have to undergo a kind of a critical theorizing about her, given the fact that I needed to focus on Black women, and Enhenwana is from southern Iraq originally. I need to think through the fact of womanhood and the fact of that scientific inquiry, according to what these researchers have said, really does signal the fact that science was not the prerogative of men or white men, and that women like Juana need to be centered in how we think about science in general, and also how we think about the interdisciplinary nature of science. As mentioned, she was a poet, astronomer. She wrote hymns, so she's known as what would be a version of what they say is a Shakespeare in her influence. So for myself, I had to undergo this kind of rigorous humility in order to expand my understanding of what womanhood is and look at it from multiple cultural lenses. So we also need to look at, well, what kinds of theories can we use in navigating through the kind of materials that are out there? Because there are many, as we're engaging in reading materials, online exhibitions, biographies, and archives. We need to think through the fact of some of what is being told to us through Pew studies that are now talking about the problem that Black people in science today are not as represented as they should be. And so linking then to the sheroes that I found in my inquiries, I felt that they demonstrated what Patricia Hill Collins refers to as a dialectic of oppression and resistance. So as a result of listening to these stories, and a very good example is this book that was produced recently by Tanya Bolden, and in it it's titled Changing the Equation, 50 US Black Women in STEM. So here I am promoting somebody else's book, but I have to do that because she's compiled an incredible book that is a testimony for the kind of information that's out there. It's to us to be able to compile. And I also want to do a challenge to my colleagues here that we really do need to do more of this kind of oral histories, but with women in science and Black people in STEM. We need to have the biographies and information that is available to our children and our youth, because it's their stories that can ignite their imagination. So I don't have a copy of, say, for instance, African-Canadian scientists in one book. And so we need these books. I'm asking my colleagues that are here to do that kind of research and work to pull those biographies together, because we must recognize our giants. And so this is something I've come to understand in my viewing of the different biographies, that much like where the star regions are created, these women leave me in complete awe. They're so amazing. They are awakened. They, no matter what the odds have been stacked up against her, she provides this vision of what is possible. And so then that's why I say she leaves us in awe, much like the stars region does. She conveys this wisdom, a moral and inner compass based on justice, and her journey includes surmounting the intersectionalities of racism, sexism, classism, and she rises out of those constraints to better the lives of children, not just located in her own community, but also at the national and international levels. So when we read about these extraordinary women, we are completely excited. They produce this distinct excitement as an outcome of their excellence. Her actions bring forward her vision, her creative insights, her innovations, through which she demonstrates a rigor, a vitality, high energy toward being an agent of change. So just to give you a couple of examples of these women that I've got to know, one is Donna Agasti. Her beginnings were very humble, and yet it led to extraordinary impact. She was raised by a single mother, much like what I'm raising with my children. And she was known to, her mother was known to work extremely hard to advance her children's education. She went on to study electrical engineering and computer science at the University of California, Berkeley in 1980. Donna Augusti is celebrated as a leader in computer science field and as a software developer and entrepreneurial businesswoman. She actually led a team from Apple where they developed the Newton, the personal digital assistant that set the pace for what has become known today as the smartphone technology. So a leader in her own right. So she went on to co-found a company and as a co-founder, and sold that company in 2000 for a whopping $147 million. She became celebrated as the 25 most influential women of small businesses by Fortune 500. And during the early 2000s, she founded a foundation called Leave a Little Room. It's a charity that provided people with the necessities of life, including homes. So her desire to give back to children and youth spans the globe, including Africa, Mexico, Haiti. And she returned to do her doctoral studies, and she earned the title of eminent engineer, as described by the University of Colorado, Boulder. So the other person I just want to speak to, you would all know her very well. She's such an incredible voice and force in STEM. Is Dr. May Diane Adrian. And her contributions are widely spoken about. She's a Canada Research Professor at the University of Toronto. And there are many sources based on her interviews, her research presentations, her professional websites that document her work. May Diane's conversations, for instance, with the host of Quirks and Quarks about her research on black widow spiders and her work as a scientist, are one of the most influential interviews that I listened to. So, for example, she talks about pushing the boundaries in terms of the value of the importance of the study on black widows. But it's her testimony during that interview about her experiences of being both a black woman and a scientist that are very moving. She spoke with candor about the truth and spoke, in a sense, the truth to power. Her interview provides an intimate discussion based on her personal experiences, specifically with racism and discrimination. And moreover, she explores analytically concepts that assist with honing in on racial discriminatory practices that are covert and much harder to single out. The problems, so for instance, of microaggressions in the workplace are discussed. And so her work, I think, should be compiled in one of those biographies that I'm challenging you all to do, because our students need to have these biographies ready for them at the tip of their fingers, so that they don't have to spend as much time looking and seeking for these biographies, but they should be available for them to learn from. So in this cycle that I mentioned to you, the third is around theorizing on teaching and learning approaches. And so part of that means integrating new theories. Her stories can become part of that in terms of the curriculum that we developed together with the community. There's importance of linking theories to support the approaches that you use in her stories. And Black feminism is a particular theoretical background that, I mentioned to you earlier about Patricia Hill Collins. Her work on unearthing and the archaeological history of Black women's contributions have to do with this epistemology, this way of knowing. And this approach to their leadership rings true from answering back and from this dialect of both oppression but resistance, and answering in a way in which they then lead their communities and support their children in terms of their own emancipation. So it's important for us to, as teachers, not just learn about these incredible women, but to also do so with respect. And so my personal view is drawing from Black feminist theory to do that, to study those sheroes, those heroes, and the counterscripts that they bring, their desire to lead through their innovation, much like what we heard about Donna Augustine. It's not just a liberation of herself, but it's a liberation of her community. That's coming from Black feminism. When we read about Black feminist theory and epistemology, it is about emancipation of not just yourself, but the community. So we need to embed this understanding in our historical thinking as we think about teaching strategies. We can include things such as secondary sources, newspaper articles, and so forth, as well as primary sources. And we've heard from some of our colleagues that are doing archival research, which is primary sources. We need to bring both of those together, but we also need to use the ideas of social scientists as we're doing so, and honor Black people's voices in what we do. Another important aspect is the inroads that are being made in many of the school boards, so and the associations, teachers associations. So I point to the Ontario College of Teachers. They just produced a huge document about combating anti-Blackness and racism. That's something that we need to draw from as well as we're developing our lessons and our approaches when we're building knowledge using these important women and their contributions. We also need to do so with that understanding of the community and the difference they're making for the community. Okay, so the next cycle or aspect would be 4, and that's theory to practice connections, revising the curriculum, redressing the omissions of Black women's contribution, and examining relevant curriculum in order to do so, weaving through life stories and life histories and contributions to STEM and STEAM, and using STEAM in order to do that as well. So the 5th is for the teacher, educator, or yourself to start to ask questions about what kind of conclusions that you've derived. To delve further into the topic, using your critical reflections, seeking out professionals associations, to connect with, to do that. And some of what we heard from was community archival research that's being done, so connecting with the work that is in process in communities right now, bringing the experts into your classroom, having them dialogue with your students, and for your students themselves to form their own inquiries based on the topics that you bring into the classroom. And the 6th aspect would be using your renewed knowledge to act. So after you've selected these additional resources, dig a bit deeper, form discussion groups, have these dialogues with other colleagues, share your self-understanding with other professionals, do such things as presenting in teacher-led groups, and discuss what you have found. So share that knowledge with other people, whether it's within your own context, in your own school, or within your school board. But the idea is to activate change, not just within yourself, but within your wider circles. And then we return then to the beginning of the cycle. And from your inquiry, it can be a source of leading to new sets of questions. a new inquiry that asks you to act. So for us, we first ask questions, Leslie and I included, we first asked questions around, who are the Black women in STEM, but we also wanted to find out this work as it's reflected by contemporary women. So we sought out the work that is evident in archival research, looking at people such as Beverly Solomon and her contributions that now have been archived at York University. So we're constantly asking ourselves these kinds of questions from what we're finding. And in the center of this reflective cycle is the personal. So as we are going through these different phases, at the center of all of this, through journaling, through conversations, through constant critical self-examination, we think about where we are and how, in fact, what we are reading is challenging us to think differently. And then so number 7 says, how do I feel about all of this? How is my thinking changing? How has my thinking been confirmed? How have I grown in terms of my own understanding about my initial questions and wonderings? What were some of the challenges that I underwent? And how does this all fit with my growing professional identity? How do the changes fit or shift with my philosophy and teaching? So just to sum up then, what I've shared with you is a journey into the incredible contributions of women and what contributions they've made historically to society. I've offered you an approach that can assist you, teachers, academic, who work with other student teachers in terms of teacher education classes. I've also used this approach with my students. I teach a course in reflective practitioner. And what I have found is there are a lot of resources in terms of the United States and not many in the Canadian context. So I put this reflective cycle together, and my students now do those kinds of inquiries to build their understanding of their professional responsibilities. And this inquiry can then be used in teacher education programs. So I offer it as an approach to assist you in documenting the meaning of your journey, and one that it should include honoring Black feminist theories and voices. So I'll end there just to say thank you, and if you're interested to find out more about this cycle that I mentioned, please contact me. I'd be happy to share more with you. Okay? Thanks, then. I appreciate that. Thank you.